Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Camille Moore with Connect, and I'd like to thank you for tuning into Meeting Budgets and Cost-Saving Strategies in Unprecedented Times with Terri Woodin. Thank you all for joining us at this moment. We know things are a little hectic in the world, so we appreciate you taking your time out of the day to learn some new knowledge with Terri today. Before we get started, we have just a few housekeeping notes on the platform. You can type in your questions for Terri in the Q&A box on your screen. If you look down at below, you'll see where it says Q&A. So you can go ahead and type your questions in there, and we will be pausing throughout this session to answer some questions. A recorded session will be available on demand on our website, where you can find additional on-demand webinars for anyone needing some last-minute credit hours for CMP testing. Yes, you're able to watch our sessions on demand and still receive credits. For everyone joining us live today, the credit is approved for 1 credit hour for CPM-IS Domain D Financial Management. We will send your certificate tomorrow evening, so be on the lookout for that. For any future viewers who are watching this session on demand and not live, you can email me directly at cmoore@connectmeetings.com to receive your certificate. Before I introduce Terri, I would like to thank Kalahari Resorts for sponsoring today's sessions. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Terri Woodin. Terri Woodin, CMP, is Vice President of Marketing and Global Meeting Services at Meeting Sites Resource. She has been with MSR since 2012 and is responsible for strategically partnering with MSR customers in all facets of global site research, custom hotel contract negotiations, meeting support services, and strategic meetings management solutions. Terri, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Okay, sharing the screen. Can everybody see my screen? Camille, can everybody see my screen? Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to Connect for having me today to present, and thank you for our sponsor, Kalahari Resorts, for sponsoring this today. And I know how crazy busy everybody is in these unprecedented times. So thank you for taking time out of your day for education on how to meeting budget and cost saving strategies in these unprecedented times. So, let's see. There we go. Want to make sure our arrows are working here. So these are the topics that we're going to cover today, which you saw in the notes when you elected to sign up. So I'm not going to read through them. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. So I wanted to show where we were at in February, because in March, the cyclone, the hurricane, everything came in all at once. So in February, everything was looking great. The industry was growing, supply was increasing, meaning the number of hotels being built. Demand was still increasing. Occupancy was down just a little bit, but that was only because in 15 years, it was the first time we had a lot of new hotels coming into the market. Average daily rate for us planners don't necessarily like it when that keeps increasing, but it was indeed. Things were looking great. And then March came in with a storm. So March 11th is when the WHO declared their pandemic status and totally upturned our world. If you remember, 2 weeks before that, we knew it was here. How do we deal with it? But the whole world changed on that day. Meeting bans were put on by governments, and we could only gather in less than 10 people. Our travel managers told us we weren't allowed to travel, so even if we wanted to go to a meeting and do it virtual, we weren't able to. And then you have the safety of travel, the fear that people had to get on a plane or go to a hotel or a meeting room. And that fear of exposure with all the unknowns just created the chaos that we're experiencing. So then now I looked at July. Where are we at? We were crazy insane in March. April was the lowest numbers ever recorded for our industry. May had a little bit of recovery in the limited service hotels, but how are things looking as of right now? So I always like to include both sides, the suppliers and the planners. I spent 35 years on the supplier side, first 15 years in conference services, catering and banquets, and then 20 years in on-property and global sales. And I've been a planner now for the last 9. So being able to share both sides on what they're dealing with, since we're all in this together, really, I think helps. So what hotels are looking at right now is how do we reopen? What do we have to do to ensure we're providing safety? Our leisure guests, our business traveler guests, and our meeting guests will come back. And they're looking at just to reopen a one-time reopening expense of $30,000. And what that's for is all of the new requirements that they have to provide a clean and safe environment. Hotels are projecting a 30% increase in their cleaning supply, and they're saying that's going to average about $3 per occupied room for all the PPE that's required for the room cleaning. And then 60% of planners surveyed as of July 15th, so most updated information from the North Star Meetings Group Pulse Survey, say their #1 job right now is rescheduling and rebooking. Being a meeting planner, I could honestly say that's where I'm spending most of my time. But we're also 27% of us are researching future meetings, but only 5% are contracting. And I can say a lot of my current looking at 21, 22, looking beyond, but not a lot of folks are contracting brand new meetings. And then just in June, a survey was done and 40% of planners were answering that they were going to reschedule their March, April, May meetings into September, October, November. And now that's reduced to 25%. And unfortunately, a lot of that is because this virus is going in the wrong direction. So confidence is also going in the wrong direction. So now we're seeing 56% of planners are looking at Q1, even Q2. And Q2 has the strongest look right now. And mainly that's because of all the data and the research we hear from scientists are hopeful that we'll have a vaccine. And then by the end of Q1, beginning of Q2, enough of us will have had it that the safety and confidence will go up. But this uncertainty is our biggest obstacle. Right now, if you have a meeting, they're going small, they're going regional. People are feeling okay to drive, but don't really want to get on a plane. And the biggest concern for planners currently is what mandates are happening, where are they happening? We don't have a federal government mandate, so states are each doing their own thing. And then as you've seen in many of the states, even the counties are doing their own thing. So this is very confusing on, do I move forward with a meeting? Will people just go 2 miles down the street into the next county to go out to dinner in the evening and do their offsite activities because that county has a different mandate? It's a little crazy right now. And then if we do make the decision to move forward, we really need attendee support of being willing to do temperature checks, using the hand sanitizer, wearing their masks, following the stickers on the floor, and staying 6 feet away from the plexiglass dividers. And being able to do that will allow us to move forwards. But again, we're all seeing it in our own communities, whether you go to the grocery store or Home Depot or wherever you might go, that is a fight in of its own. And then virtual became very popular. Hybrid became popular with groups trying to move forward with their meetings. But this is obviously a budget concern, and we'll get into that a little bit later on where that falls. And then really to have the ability to move forward, planners are looking for that flexibility in attrition, cancellation, as well as their food and beverage minimums. If we call one of our supplier partners and say, you know, our meetings are going to have the 500 people we thought it was going to have, are you still willing to take us if we can bring as many people as we can? And most hotels are saying yes, help us stay open, help us keep our staff working, we'll take whoever you can bring. And having that flexibility really helps. And then the organizations that, you know, we all know the hospitality industry is being decimated, and the meeting industry and the airline industry, but there's also a lot of industries that are still going strong, and they have different ways that they can work, and so they're not being hit as hard economically, and if they're able to, they will definitely meet. So how do we manage this pandemic landscape? All of this craziness is going on. We all know it's uncertain times. There's so many unknowns affecting our decisions. And it's a little scary when the health experts predict normalcy, put that word in quotes, to return in 2022. That's pretty far out. And how do we manage and operate during these times? First, communicate with your supplier partners and operate from a partnership standpoint. We're all experiencing this and we all have a common goal. If your meeting is 2-3 months away, it might be too far out for government bans to support force majeure. And what you need to find out, is your hotel able to service the meeting? One of the biggest things is to get a reasonable assurance from your hotel partners or your venue partners on their ability to perform. Over 3,000, almost 4,000 hotels completely closed in March and April. Are they back open? And if they're open, are they able to meet your needs for your meeting? They might have limited staff. They might be short staffed because they don't have the occupancy to be able to bring people back full time. So you can write a letter to your hotel and ask for an assurance that they're able to actually perform and do your meeting. And then you have to make a go, no-go decision. At some point, you've got to stop the bleeding from the organization standpoint of all the costs of going into planning, marketing, working with your sponsors, attendees. So when you make that decision, pick up the phone, call your supplier partners. Don't just send them a letter from legal that says you want to cancel under cancellation or terminate under force majeure. Be a good partner. And at the same time, manage your stakeholders' expectations, read your cancellation clauses, understand what you're responsible for, take a snapshot in time of what is happening in the county where your hotel is, in the state, understand what market intelligence factors are, and then go back to your stakeholders and explain and keep open communication with your supplier partners. These are some websites that I put together for you that have quick and easy how to find out what are the CDC guidelines in the state or in the county where you're meeting, what are the most popular social distancing product resources that all the clients and the suppliers are asking for. And there's so many products to help you prepare for your meeting to meet the social distancing guidelines. So shop around. These are by no means the final and above all, but it can be a big budget buster, because when you did your budget last year, 6 months ago, we weren't in a pandemic. So make sure you have resources for the top items that you'll need. And then if you don't have a risk management plan in place, now's the time to get one. If you have a risk management plan in place, evaluate what's been going well and what hasn't been going well during these first few months of the pandemic, and make any necessary changes. There's a lot of professional people out there that their sole purpose of their organizations is to create risk management plans that would be best for your particular organization. And then event cancellation insurance. This one is hard. It doesn't actually include pandemic. And in full disclosure, they don't cover infectious diseases. So when we've had other things in the past come up, those got eliminated from their list of things that you can insure for, or it takes years before SARS, for example, is not an issue anymore, and then they might be able to list something like. But the most important thing is read the fine print, budget accordingly, and get the best comprehensive coverage possible. I can tell you, the more things you try and cover, the more expensive it gets, and many organizations don't have that in their budgets. But be careful. Sometimes stakeholders are like, well, if we had event cancellation insurance, we would have been okay. No, because pandemics aren't included in such insurance. So let's take a look at some budget considerations that are new that we didn't even think about 6 months ago, and how we need to incorporate them into our budgets now. So hygiene solutions, for example, those are your floor stickers, your hand washing stations, your masks and plastic dividers. This adds a lot to your budget, so shop around. For registration, you need plastic dividers between each person behind the registration tables. You need the 6-foot stanchion distancing signs. You need the touch-free and the prepaid registration. Think about pens and handouts. No handouts, send them to them in email in advance, and we all know nobody reads anything in advance, so you'll want to resend it during your program as if they could pick it up in registration. And something fun I've seen a lot of clients doing is including the photo of the attendee on the name badges, because the masks hide our faces, and they want to be able to see who they're talking to. So you'll have to pre-print those badges and mail them to the attendees. If they forget them at home, which some people will, then you'll have to have a backup plan for that. But for the most part, the least amount of touching and contact is the goal. And then when you reconfigure your meeting schedule, as I mentioned earlier, you might go hybrid. You might get as many people there as you can, but you need to take a look at how you're seating. And the 1 per 6 foot, which the revenue managers are ready to kill us, right? Because that's not maximizing the space, but we all have to follow the proper social distancing guidelines in order to be able to meet it all. So when you reconfigure that, what is the time and the effort if you have to get a company that has the computerized systems in addition to the hotels to be sure you can lay all of your space out? It's all concerns that can increase your costs. And then AV, if you do go virtual or you do go hybrid, what does that look like? How does that affect your budget? Some of my big association clients are doing a breakout meeting room where you have one headset that stays with you from beginning to end of the conference, and you go into that room and there might be 6 screens for 6 breakouts, but you dial into your specific breakout so that you don't have people moving around as much between breakouts, but they go to one session and select their breakout. They're assigned to one chair, one headset, and they always go back to that. But how that affects your budget, again, is something that we all need to think about. Food and beverage is not going to have buffets unless I have it set up like our grade school lunchroom with the lunch ladies and gentlemen that served us. So serving plated or boxed meals. Action stations will have to have partitions, beverage stations and condiments on the table, limiting interaction with the staff. All of these things are definitely a thing to think of, and also to have a conversation with your hotel about, because they have a duty of care to provide a safe environment for the meeting. What are they already putting in place, and then what will you be responsible for putting into place so that those costs can be shared? Welcome gifts, they're fun to get when you're on site, but probably will need to be mailed pre-meeting or post-meeting. And then room rental may increase to cover the hotel's PPE costs and the social distancing procedures. So these are just some of the things to consider. And then some additional is evaluating, preparing to mitigate risk. That's your risk management plan that you want to make sure you get one if you don't have one already. Ultimately, safety is #1 priority for everybody, for the hotel staff, for your planning staff, suppliers, vendors, anybody that would come in to help you support your meeting every step of the way. Some questions to ask yourself and ask your hotel is how many security loss prevention personnel are on site during each shift? What really is their job, their authority, and their training? What is the venue's emergency plan? Do they have a doctor on call, or are you going to add a doctor on site during your conference? What's the venue's ventilating and air conditioning system qualities, and how is fresh air filtered in the meeting rooms and the guest rooms? And then the hotel's redesigned public spaces. Have they limited the human contact, and what are their cleaning processes? The security one I mentioned a moment ago is pretty important, because as we've seen on all the clips on the news and social media with people upset being asked to wear a mask, the hotel does have the right to no shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service, and you can do the same thing, but you can't depend on meeting planning staff or hotel staff, because things can get out of hand, unfortunately, and you just want to prepare that you've got the proper on-site security to enforce the mask wearing, the social distancing, the meeting room capacities, elevator usage, bathroom lines, meeting break lines. You don't want that to be left up to a volunteer. You might have to have increased staff to manage all of these processes, plus your traffic flow. You also want to prepare what if staff get sick once they're on site? Do you have an alternative room that you can send them to so that they can quarantine? Do you have alternative staff to back them up if that happens? You want to be sure that you're identifying a space that you can isolate attendees that become sick and staff that become sick. And then you want to also communicate within your meetings. I get a lot of questions from folks asking, do you have a duty to share that somebody at the conference got sick? I am not formally a lawyer, so I would refer you to your legal counsel, but that's a decision you're going to have to make with your organization and how you want to communicate that information. And then some other things to consider. Do you want to control your ground transfers? If people come into your meeting and they take Lyft and Uber and public transportation, that's increasing their contact points. And you may have to bring in organized bus transportation that will help you limit that contact point. So Camille, we can take some questions if there's any in the queue right now.
Let's see, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and send them in. Taking a little break.
It's a lot of information to share, so I understand. Yeah. And if not, we'll take another break in a few minutes and people can enter their questions in and we'd be happy to come back around to it.
Yes.
So the next part that we want to cover that I had in our learning objectives today is understanding how hotels value your meetings. As I mentioned earlier, I was on the hotel side for quite a long time, and as a director of group sales and looking at all of these things with revenue management, deciding how and why we would accept your RFP or decline your RFP, I thought it was really important to share with the planner side how they're looking at your RFP so that you can include a lot of these things so that you can leverage the value of your meeting. So one of the first things that hotels look at, and granted some of these things are adjusted a little bit in this crazy pandemic time, but for the most part during the crash of 08 and 09 and other things that we've incurred, things pretty much follow these lines. And so the transient demand is your leisure traveler and your individual business travelers. What that business mix is for a hotel on any given day of the week is what helps that hotel decide if they're going to take your group business. And the reason why is the transient rates are much higher. And a lot of times planners will say to me, well, we're bringing food and beverage and we're doing all these other things that are increased revenue for the hotel. Unfortunately, the transient rate is pretty high compared to a meeting group rate. And so even bringing those additional things, a transient usually outwins. But if you're in a downtown location, the transient demand is the highest on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. So if you have a group that can arrive on Sunday and check out on Wednesday that can layer nicely with that transient demand, you'll probably get a yes. If you want to arrive on Tuesday in downtown Chicago, downtown Atlanta, New York, any major city, you're probably going to get a no. And so sharing that information with your stakeholders who they've always arrived on a Tuesday and they don't want to adjust what they've ever done, have the hotel offer both patterns, and showing data to your stakeholders will help you in your wanting to win them over to adjust their pattern. And that's where the second one on the list really comes into play. If it's a destination resort, their typical arrival departure patterns are Thursday to Sunday, and then a city, they don't want you on the weekends because the leisure demand is so high. They want you midweek, Sunday to Wednesday or Thursday. So if you can make your pattern, build a wall to those patterns, you're going to get a lot closer to yes. Now, rooms to space ratio, kind of laughed when I was reviewing this again this morning, because right now those are right out the window, right? With the pandemic social distancing setting. But now more than ever, they really need to take a look at how do we reduce our footprints as planners. So that idea that a lot of our clients are using with having one breakout room and they can dial into which screen they're going to watch, that reduces that footprint that allows them to seat your general session at that 1 per 6 foot and follow the social distancing guidelines. They also look heavily at your food and beverage. They want to know what your history is. Although I always caution the hotels to do your homework and understand where the client was previously, because if they met in Savannah, Georgia last year and they're looking at New York City this year, you can imagine the food and beverage costs are extremely different. So understanding each property's menu pricing and how many of your attendees are eating at each event gets you closer to that conversation of what your actual spend will be. Lead time. If you have a meeting that you want to book between now and December 31st of 2020, they are going to love you. There are so many hotels that have had to rebook, change dates, or have had cancellations that they have the space if you're willing to go. Or in other cases, and in typical times, the further out you book, you have more choices in your top tier, second tier cities, and you might have to go to a third or a fourth tier city due to demand. Along with the lead time is a seasonality. There are so many places that you can get a rockin' deal if you're in their shoulder season or their off season. You may not want to go to the Palm Desert or Phoenix Scottsdale in the middle of July. They would love to have you. They have lower rates and great incentives to get you to come during that time. But if the peak time is too hot for you, maybe look at their shoulders, but right before and after those hot months. So taking a look at that and having that flexibility to move, the hotels, they love you and they'll have great deals for that. As far as history goes, they want to know where you've been and what you've paid. And on the meeting planning side, we always say if our budget is 200, the hotel's going to quote 199. If our budget is 300, they're going to quote 299. So it's not as important of the room rate as it is the history of where you've been. And the reason why I say that is I've had a lot of hotels turn down business, and then I ask them why, and they say you can't afford us because it's a big chain that's looking at history in their computer systems. But they were in elementary school during the crash of 08 and 09 and have no context to put around why you got that amazing room rate. So help them with that context of why you could go to a 4-star, 5-star resort in 2009, 2010, and the room rate was 159, and now it's back to 559. So having history with some context is really important. And then potential incremental revenue. That's your money you spend at the spa, the money that you spend at the golf course, the ski resorts, the gift shops, the bars. You know what your attendees are spending when they're on property, and being able to demonstrate that to the hotels will help you get closer to yes. For example, if you know your group spends a lot of time in the lobby bar after the meetings every day, and you can track that spend, you can give a code number they give to the bartender. You can have them wear wristbands. There's different technology and name badges now that you can actually track that revenue, and that helps you leverage your RFP. And then the value of your total account is really how much can you go back to the same city? How many meetings do you do? How much do you work within one brand? What you can bring back? Is it a one-off meeting and Atlanta's not going to see it for another 15 years? Or do you have the potential of bringing 10 into that same city and working with your CVBs to really be able to get the incentives that they offer as well? And then risk, they're looking at, did you pick up what you contracted? Are you always just sneaking in right before that 20% attrition or 10% attrition, whatever it is that you're negotiating in your contracts? And what have you done in the past? They want to know that they can count on you. Obviously the pandemic situation out of the picture because we're all in the same boat with that. But the more that you can show what you contract and what you pick up gives them confidence that you know what your numbers are. And then the other thing to look at when we were talking about being able to layer in groups, they take a look at whatever's already on their books, what years you're looking at. A lot of times they'll just decline you and say no rooms, no space, but they might have rules within the city. If you're using a city-owned hotel or hotels that are connected or close to the convention center, make sure you push back and ask the hoteliers. You're not going to hurt our feelings if you give us what the truth is. If you're trying to book 5 years out, but they're only able to book 3 years out because of parameters set by their cities. So this is just a little chart of average hotel chain and independent hotels. These are the average profit margins that hotels run. So the things that we just reviewed on the previous page, this is why it's important. The two biggest profit centers for hotels is in their rooms and their food and beverage. And then if you look at 15% is that incremental revenue that I talked about, if you can track it.
Hey, Terry.
Yes.
We did have some questions come in if you want to take a little break and answer some of them.
Perfect timing before we go into actual tips. Okay.
Okay, great. So we have a question. How does a meeting or event planner protect speakers during all of this?
Well, that's an interesting question because number one, the speaker has to find out if their organization travel department will legally allow them to travel. And if they can't, and you still want them to present, you could do it like we are today, or you bring them in virtually so that people, if it goes hybrid, that are live in the meeting room can see it, as well as the people that are dialing in from home. But once their travel department tells them that they can attend, they are making an acceptance of their duty of care. And what that means is you would have to prove that you've never heard of COVID-19 to be able to blame the organization if you get sick because you show up and speak. And I'm not aware of anybody that would not be aware of COVID-19. So then you're accepting the risk to travel. And then it's follow the airlines guidelines, follow the airports guidelines, follow the hotels guidelines, and have backup PPE if they lost their masks in transit or something might be missing.
Okay. Another question is, do you think that hotels will be more lenient with room block requirements, given that attendees might not be comfortable staying at the hotel and would prefer to drive home?
All the meetings that we've been working on, the hotels have been fantastic partners, and basically they just want you to come. However many people you can get to come. There is a misunderstanding that limited service hotels are the only ones that are capable of managing a safe environment, just because it's a no-brainer to know they're already set up for it. You don't have to meet anybody at the door. You don't have to talk to anybody to check in. You don't have to valet park your car. The only thing they had to adjust was their free breakfast in the morning to a grab and go concept. But please know that full service hotels have also completely revamped everything that they're doing so that they can accommodate and provide a safe environment.
Okay. Regarding ventilation, what should we be looking for when evaluating a venue, and what can we do if ventilation isn't great?
Honestly, if the ventilation is not up to standards that you can review with your internal teams, as to what is acceptable, you can Google that as well because it is listed on the sites. There's been a lot of videos that are out there right now that people are scared to fly in a plane because they think it's recycled air, and they actually take outside air and put it inside every 2 minutes, and it goes through a filtration system on the plane. So you're actually safer on a plane than you are sitting in a restaurant right now. So understanding if it's, I would say your only concern would be if you're going to a really old hotel is to verify that their ventilation systems are updated. How often are they recycling, and work with their on-site team to understand if they have any concerns and address them. But you would have to make the decision to not be able to go forwards because they can't provide that assurance that they're providing a safe environment. And that is a reason under force majeure.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and go through the tips since we're about 25 minutes here down to go. Here's some food and beverage cost savings tips that I put together. When I say piggyback onto the menu of another group, That's how conference centers operate. Their food and beverage pricing is much lower because you go to like a cafeteria style lunch, all the groups meet in there. They have AM and PM breaks that is the same food for all the groups outside their meeting rooms. And so the reason why that makes it less expensive is because it's less food that needs to be brought in, less training on the staff to prepare it and serve it, and it keeps the cost down for the hotel. If you're in a place where anything you open is yours, bring it to the VIP suite because you own it. The cork was popped. Make sure any cash bars are credited towards your food and beverage minimum. Work with your chef to develop any menus and pricing. This is really important because, you know, a lot of the chefs want to get creative, but sometimes as planners, we ask for creativity and they say the banquet menus are the banquet menus. And you really need to work with them and find the right hotel that's a good partner for you. I mean, if you have a budget of $15 for lunch and typically lunches are $40 to $50, that's not going to work for either party. But if there's things that you can do to work within your budget, and it's a reasonable amount and it meets your needs, the hotel will be willing to work with you. And then a lot of times hotels run offsite venues that you want to make sure that that gets credited to your food and beverage as well. And then you can shorten your reception, so less food, less bar consumption. You could serve your lunch on your afternoon break. You can also, any non-perishable items, you can have them hold over for your AM break. Work with the hotel on how you want those to be served. And then past hors d'oeuvres, we know right now that that is not a good thing because we can't have somebody touching the tray or touching the food that's next to the piece that they're taking. So the past hors d'oeuvres are really popular right now in the individual shot glasses, and so are desserts, and there's less on a tray. And then you want to utilize anything that the hotel has in-house so that you don't have to rent linens and things like that. And then if you have small groups, a lot of times there's extra banquet fees for you're less than 20 people, so you have to pay a surcharge of $200 or something like that. See if you can dine in the restaurant instead of doing it in banquets. And then compare your liquor purchasing methods. Sometimes, depending on your history, what you can show the hotel on what your consumption is, on how many people are drinking what per hour. Having that history and working with them, you can decide what is the best cost-effective way. And then you always want to make sure you're inventorying your bars. And then especially for association meetings and even corporate meetings too, that's a great way to have sponsors get a really big bang for their buck, is to sponsor one of the meal periods, and then maybe they even come in and do a presentation at the beginning so that it isn't just a logo on a screen. And then the AV part, you want to make sure that you're discounting and waiving fees as much as possible. You also want to make sure that these things are in your contract up front, because once you've signed, you have less leverage. If you do bring in an LCD projector or a power cord or a power strip that they get $75 per strip for, you want to make sure that you negotiate in your contract that there's no extra fee to do that. And then if there's any way to assign your breakout rooms to the same type of room that has the same AV setup, the less time labor is involved, that really reduces your costs. And then if you bid to an outside supplier, they are typically always less than the on-site AV team that we've found in all of our planning experience, but you want to give the on-site the ability to negotiate as well. So if you do find an alternative supplier outside, share that with the on-site so that you have their expertise with the equipment. And then also be sure that if you do have to bring in an outside production team for anything, that you don't have to pay those $600 to $1,000 fees to be able to do that. And the best way to do all of this is when you do your site inspection, have the AV specialist be part of your site. And then just a note, you don't necessarily need microphones with 50 people or less. You want to make sure you get flat rates for your phone lines, waive your fees for offsite companies, make sure you're bidding to multiple companies, and bid to local, because if they're local, they don't have to travel and it keeps those costs down. And these are just some additional things that I thought about. If it's a union property, if it's not a union property, make sure you get all those daily rates and charges so it's not a budget buster. If you do get the resort fee reduced, make sure you're getting something for it. 99% of the time, I think resort fees have nothing to do with meeting guests. They're always for leisure guests. So a lot of times we'll get the meeting internet included in the reduced resort fee so that you're getting a value for the meeting attendees. Internet in your room, your comp room policy. Most hotels don't own their parking garages, so they can't do complimentary parking, but take care of your VIPs and see if you can get some comp passes. Your acceptance and storage of materials, see if you can get X amount included, be able to show your history of what you actually have delivered. You want to make sure you don't have early departure fees because that's double dipping on attrition, and you shouldn't have any early departure fees if you have an attrition clause in your contract. And then you want to work with your partnerships with your global sales reps, with the chains and independents, and then your CVBs. They have incredible incentives for coming to their destination or coming to their brand. And then the other thing that I've seen that's really popular is the discounts off the master accounts. Negotiate bulk deals, make sure your money spent is on impactful items. So often people are still doing things like swag that doesn't matter and doesn't really drive the point of the meeting. And you want to make sure that cut that if it's not making the goals. And you want to make sure that what is important to the attendees and everything that you're doing is a cost-effective element for them. Things to avoid on budget mistakes: not completing your budget process, meaning you want to make sure that you're including everything and what you're actually spending along the way, and you're adjusting as you're going. Forgetting to include all the taxes, service charges, and fees. Not keeping a detailed list as expenses come in. If things change, all of these things can really affect your budget, and you need to update it as you go. As far as calculating actual costs, when you first did your budget, you probably didn't have the most current menus. Make sure you're including the actual menus. And then you want to be sure after your contract is signed that you're doing a cost savings report to show the specific measures to define and report your success. So for example, you work with the hotel on what the actual costs are versus what you contracted for, and the hotel will be like, well, here's a rack room rate. Well, everybody knows nobody pays a rack room rate. So you want to make sure that it's something you can defend. It's the room rate you started with and what you negotiated to. And you can put it in a Excel spreadsheet so that you show, here's, you know, the final negotiated rate. You save $20, that goes in there. Any upgrades, staff rooms, all the things that we talked about earlier that you're saving. And then afterwards, you can, after the meeting that is, you can actually take anything that was discounted once it's been ordered, like AV discounts, food and beverage discounts, and you can do a second cost savings report after the meeting's actualized. We have some of our clients that actually take their cost savings reports into their annual reviews because it shows their hard cost dollar savings that they were able to do by meeting. So have a negotiations plan, and let's talk about the contract clauses before we run out of time here that are the most important and probably the ones that most often turn into disputes. So current trends, we're seeing a sliding scale attrition. They want a guaranteed room block with no attrition. They won't do a resell or a rebook, or they'll only do one or the other, or they're even doing attrition by day. And until confidence increases, as of, I want to say May, when all the hotels realized everybody that was canceling in March and April wasn't a short-term thing, we are starting to see flexible attrition. So I just wanted to show you an example of an attrition clause. And what's important about this is that you calculate it based on profit, not revenue. A hotel's true loss is their profit, not the revenue that they make. So if you have a $189 room rate and you're using a 75% profit percentage or whatever you agree to with the hotel that they can go back and prove, you're actually multiplying the number of hotels, the number of hotel rooms that you drop below your attrition percentage at the profit number, and there it shows $141.75, not at the original 189. And then you want to make sure that you're getting, after the group cutoff date, if your room type is available, that they honor it. And right now with the hotels obviously being in low occupancy with the current pandemic, they are willing to do that. But throughout your meetings, you want to be sure that you can do that. And you want to try to get the resale so that you get credit for any resold rooms. The hotel does have the right to sell their rooms first, so they may be the last rooms resold, but if they do resell them, which if they're confident in their sales team, they will, you should be able to get credit. Cancellation clauses, sole cancellations for the group with no accountability if the hotel cancels, not able to resell or rebook, not getting your damages due towards your cancellation amount. And this is an example of a cancellation clause. Very often in hotel contracts, they say the number of days, but they don't show the dates. Or it says that it doesn't say the dollar amount. So if you win the lottery and you're no longer with your organization, or your salesperson does the same thing and they're no longer there, you want anybody to be able to pick up the contract and actually be able to do the math. And these are some of the items that I just mentioned that you want to make sure you can include these items as well in your cancellation, and most of these are the same that we already reviewed in attrition. So I want to move forward to force majeure because that's the biggest one right now that everybody's dealing with. And if you have your own custom contract like we do, we have commercially impracticable in ours, but hotel contracts don't. And it has been quite interesting conversations with the hotels and the planners right now on what actually applies to force majeure and what doesn't. So you want to pull all of your contracts for all of your suppliers, including DMCs, ground transportation, AV, not just your venue. And if force majeure was not in the contract, then you're automatically going to the common law of the state. Will prevail, which will be similar to that. But at some point you have to make a decision to go, no go, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Make sure you're researching your market intelligence, you know what's going on, communicate with your leadership, and then pick up the phone and call your partner. Figure it out together on what your next steps are. Frustration of purpose is something new that a lot of planners weren't aware of before this pandemic hit. If you have commercially impracticable in your contract, you're proving that frustration of purpose, and you should have a frustration of purpose clause in your contract. For example, when I spoke for Connect in February before the world fell apart, Barack Obama was at their conference. If the purpose of that conference was to have him as a speaker, and he canceled, that qualifies as frustration of purpose under force majeure, and you're allowed to cancel the meeting, change the dates, what have you. So you want to be specific on what your frustration of purpose is in the contract, because it's not fair to the hotel, and it won't stand up in court if you say later when it happens that that was your frustration of purpose. But the difference between most hotel contracts have a legal and impossible. So given everything that we've been experiencing, if you can still get on a flight, despite the fact that only 5% were flying, you can still get 10 people to the meeting. It's not illegal or impossible, but it is commercially impracticable. And those are the key words that you want to make sure you have in your contracts going forwards for both the hotel and the planner. It's a mutual that you both need to agree to. And then you can't include every single possible thing in force majeure. And if you try to, it actually limits you, because then it only qualifies on what you specifically list, or you have to have the catch-all phrase, including but not limited to, as I have noted there. So I'm just going to finish these last two slides, and I'm going to open it up to questions, Camille. These are just my 5 steps in summarizing everything that we've talked about here today. Make sure you're using a strategic RFP, leverage the value, understanding how hotels look at your RFP, be a good partner and show that information, and provide the context around the data that you're providing in your RFP. track your activity, spend, and history to be able to support what it is that you're asking for. Be a good partner with open negotiations and communication, but you always have, I forget which, I think it's Foster that has the power of 2 feet law that he calls it, that if it's not working out, you can always go to the next hotel. And then be sure to track everything and have a cost savings, risk reduction, and cost containment report. So I'm going to open it back up to questions because I did all the legal stuff in the end, and that's where I get most of the questions. So Camille, I'll turn it over to you. It's a lot to take in.
We do have a few questions. Some of the attendees are wanting to know if the PowerPoint will be available for a handout. I can always convert it to PDF and send it to them.
Yes, I will send it to you for you to do that, Camille.
Okay, great. So we got that out of the way, so this will be available. And one of the questions I received was, is there a margin or percentage of transient rate versus group rate? I've experienced hotels quoting a group rate of only $10 to $15 cheaper than the transient slash daily rate for a given time of the year. I would imagine the transient rate should be much higher.
Not necessarily. It's based on demand and what they already have on the books. So they're taking a look at history. What have they typically brought in for leisure and business travelers versus the group business mix? And it depends on the pattern as well. So if you're in a major metropolitan city, you're trying to go over that Tuesday, Wednesday, they're going to raise the group rates as well because their demand is so high. But if you're able to come in on Sunday, the demand goes way down and you're going to get a better, more reduced rate. So you kind of have to look at that trifecta of information.
Okay. Someone said, I see you noted per night basis on attrition rather than cumulative. Why? I always thought cumulative was better for the group.
Cumulative is better for the group. That slide was showing what hotels are asking for, and traditionally over the seller's market that we were in prior to March, hotels switched to a daily attrition. A lot of them did, and the main reason for that was because it's more profitable for the hotel, and they could because it was a seller's market. But definitely cumulative, but be a good partner and be able to show your history to the hotel on why you're asking for the numbers that you're asking for, so they're not left with 20% to try to fill or 10% to try to fill.
Okay. This is a little bit of a long question, so.
That's okay.
What is the best way to inform attendees that the hotel and the meeting will enforce CDC guidelines, and if they don't, they cannot participate in the meeting? We want to be very clear without being rude. Then how far in advance do we send this information to see if people cancel?
Read the very first sentence. Was this to the attendees or to the hotel?
I believe to the attendees. What is the best way to inform attendees that the hotel and the meeting will enforce CDC guidelines?
The best way is communication, and you want to send it out in multiple formats because people don't read everything that you put out there. So you want it on your website. You want a direct email that goes to the attendees. But once you get assurance from the hotel that they're able to perform from a staffing level and what's open in the hotel, they can deliver food service. There's a lot of hotels out there that aren't even delivering food right now in the meeting room. So once you find out you have assurance from the hotel that they can deliver and they're providing a safe environment, ask the hotel for their safety guidelines plan and attach that when you send it out to the hotels, so that, to the attendees, so that you can increase their comfort in attending. But the bottom line is, if it's not a single corporation that can say, our travel department says it's okay for you to attend a meeting, and you're an association that it's up to the individual attendees travel mandates or not, the best thing to do is to poll your prospect of attendees and send them a survey and ask them. And I've got association clients that are supposed to meet this fall, and they've been spending the last 30, 45 days sending out surveys, finding out what they're allowed or not allowed to do, and then you can use that data to support commercially impracticable.
Okay. Another question is, how do the new budgets play a part for paying for virtual or live speakers?
I'm not sure I understand that question. If, for example, if the speaker is live and they cost $10,000, but now they're going virtual, if they get a discount or not, maybe.
I think that's what the question may be saying.
I can address it that way. When you pay for a speaker, you're getting their engagement their actual knowledge during the presentation, and their engagement post. So if their individual company won't allow them to travel, but they can still do it virtually, you're still getting all three of those items. If you had a meet and greet that was specifically in their contract because it's a well-known speaker, or maybe you have a breakout that is more high touch with that speaker after like a general session, that might be something you could negotiate with them to reduce from their contract because they can't fulfill that piece.
Okay, we have about 2 more questions. Someone wants to know, what about taking temperatures of attendees? Do you recommend, is it the hotel or group responsible for that?
So that's a really good question. All 5 of the top hospitality industry lawyers, from Jonathan Howe, John Foster, all of them, all had the same answer on that. And they don't recommend that the group does the temperature checks because now you're legally responsible. And pretty sure most groups are not in the medical field where they can say they followed all the guidelines and did it all correct, because if you do it wrong, the attendees can actually come back to you, and you don't want that. The hotels typically are doing the temperature checks if they require them. And then another extra step to that, a lot of people think the temperature checks are silly because of the amount of people that don't show any symptoms. So really what the temperature checks are for is to get that very small percentage of people that didn't know they were sick before they got on the plane or got in their car and drove, because a lot of meetings are going regional now so people can drive. And if they get there and they have a temperature, but they didn't before they left, maybe you're keeping a few people out that you wouldn't have before, but there's so many people that are anti-symptomatic that it doesn't really prevent you from spreading it because of that. Sorry, good news, bad news.
And our last question is, how do you suggest including specific purpose in contract when some items are to be determined? For example, Connect signing hotel contract before Barack Obama was secured. How would you suggest wording the purpose in the contract before he was confirmed?
I have a sample of that, so if you want to email me, I can certainly share that with you, that I got from our top hospitality lawyers in the industry. But you basically want to be sure that you're stating exactly what the purpose of the meeting is, and this is for going forwards. So if the pandemic hit in March and the Connect meeting with Obama was in March, it would not have been in their contract, but hopefully commercially impracticable was, and you can still try and prove it, but then it's a no-brainer to show frustration of purpose if you actually show what that is. So maybe it's that the executive team has to be at the meeting for their engagement with the attendees to move the profits of the company forwards. You're not necessarily naming specific names, but you're saying what the purpose of the meeting is. If it's the trainers that have to be there to do the training, whatever it is of the reason of why you're having the meeting, that frustration of purpose just needs to say. It could be that X percentage of people, the meetings coming, our attendees are coming from China because it's a high tech company and you have a lot of offices over there. Well, the border to the United States and vice versa is closed. Our border, we can go to Europe, but Europe's not allowed to come here. So there's things that you want to be sure, whatever the actual purpose of your meeting is, that's what you're focusing on. Why are you gathering? Is it a sales meeting? Is it a training meeting? You know, what is it? And what is the purpose to make that meeting a success?
All right, and that will conclude all of our questions. Thank you so much, Terri, for sharing with us today. This has been very informative. A lot of people in the chat box were saying thank you for this. This is a great presentation. So thank you for lending your expertise.
You're very welcome.
And for everyone joining us live today, as I mentioned earlier, this credit is approved for 1 credit hour toward CMP IS Domain D Financial Management. So we will send your certificate tomorrow evening. And if you're watching this webinar on demand, please email me directly at cmore@connectmeetings.com and I will send your certificate to you. And just want to let everyone know that next week we will also be doing another webinar. Connect will be discussing about how our Connect 2020 will go. So be on the lookout for that email to register this week for next week's webinar. And again, thank you, Terry. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Everybody have a good day. Bye-bye.